Hello. The Divine Code reading for August 13th, pages 133 and 134. The Prohibition of Idolatry. We're starting in the introduction by Rabbi Emmanuel Choquette, and at the bottom of page 132. Human frailty is centered on self-interest, self-indulgence, and gratification. The egocentric as opposed to the theocentric. The powerful desire to control, direct, and manipulate the unknown future to circumvent the divine system is extremely seductive. In effect, however, it betrays a lack of trust in God and undermines true belief in God, who alone is the creator and sustainer of all beings, and who alone is in exclusive charge of all that happens to them. So that people, we don't have a clear sight of the big picture. We see bits and pieces of it. And there's a tendency to become concerned about how we fit into things, and worried about making sure that the self is taken care of in this. In the broad scheme of things, God is in charge and everything fits. But if I'm looking at myself and trying to take care of myself, which is a reasonable thing for people to do, then I'm going to say, okay, I have to make work whatever I have available to me. So I look at this need, I look at this thing, or I look at that thing as being the source of taking care of my needs, rather than God being the source of taking care of my needs. So it's concern over the self, and that my needs are what I have to figure out how to take care of, rather than concern over God's big picture of what God is trying to do. Avodah Zarah is thus a denier of pure monotheism. It presupposes a polytheistic, or at least a dualistic reality. This explains the numerous statements to be found in the Torah tradition, drawing a moral equivalence between certain attitudes and idolatry. For example, pride and arrogance are regarded as tantamount to idolatry in Tractate Sota 4b, as is losing one's temper in the Zohar Part 1, 27b. Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, Hilkot Diot, Chapter 2, Topic 3. Avoiding the giving of charity, Tractate Ketuvot 68a. Dishonesty and Deception, Tractate Sanhedrin 92a, and so forth. All of these cases imply some form of self-worship, and even when acknowledging God, also assuming a sense of self-sufficient importance, with which thus constitutes dualism. So that the way we're made, we are conscious of ourselves and our own needs. if we're going to try to figure out how to get our own needs, that creates all sorts of emotion, character traits that go after the self rather than going after God. That's the anger and so forth, is a result of feeling a need to figure it out for oneself. And there winds up all these conflicting ideas of what's important, and that's with the dualism or with the polytheism, the idea that there's many different things that are important. No wonder then that there are so many Torah laws, precepts, warnings dealing with avodah zarah. The Torah serves as the antidote to avoid idolatry's pitfalls, to guide us on the path of truth, and to help us live up to the fact that the human is created in the image and likeness of God. So if we understand that, we're created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore we should conform our character traits to godliness rather than conforming it to something else. That's how it's supposed to work, is to conform it to godliness. And that's the understanding of monotheism. Chapter 1. The prohibition of idol worship. Topic number 1. The master of the universe commanded Adam in the prohibition against serving idols. This is explained in Tractate Sanhedrin 56b, Sifri on Numbers 15:23, and Rambam in the Laws of Kings 9:1. So the master of the universe commanded Adam in the prohibition against serving idols, as it says, and this is out of Genesis chapter 2, and the Lord God commanded upon Adam, meaning that God commanded Adam to submit to his divinity. The sages explain that there are 3 meanings in this. So in this one word, I am God, there are 3 things that we learn from this. I am God means do not exchange me, to rebel or replace me with another God, which is the prohibition of idolatry. The second thing, I am God, meaning do not curse me, this being the prohibition of blaspheming God's name, since for God's honor one must not disgrace or blaspheme him. And the third understanding, I am God, meaning the fear of me shall be upon you, this being the obligation to fear God. The prohibition of idolatry has 2 facets. The command to recognize and know God. This was explained in part 1, topics, chapter 1, topic 1 to 4, and the prohibition against serving idols. So 2 aspects of the prohibition of idolatry. One is a positive, the command to recognize and to know God. And the second one being the prohibition against serving idols. In the Noahide Code, the enforceable aspects of the Noahide Code, the 7 laws, are basically negative. With some people debate the laws concerning courts, but definitely the six other laws are all negative. When it's a positive, it's not considered a mitzvah, a direct commandment, but it's implied from the direct commandment. So The direct commandment is the prohibition against idolatry, but implied in the direct commandment is an obligation to recognize and to know God. Anyone who does not recognize and believe in God is a deviant believer. This is described in part 1, chapter 1, topic 7. Likewise, anyone who serves idols denies all of God's commandments, since he does not accept God's sovereignty. So that, okay, anyone who serves anyone who serves idols denies all of God's existence. If one does not recognize God's sovereignty, even his good deeds do not truly fulfill God's will, which he revealed through his commandments that he gave at Mount Sinai. Any good principles of idol worship that an idol worshiper will observe, such as acting honestly in his business dealings and refraining from stealing, are not done in fulfillment of God's command, since he does not accept God. It's explained that without accepting the sovereignty of God, that's accepting the sovereignty of Torah, that the reward, the long-term reward, the long-term connection that occurs through obeying the commandments, the benefits of those connections were taken away from the world because the world was not observing the sovereignty of God. Now, there's still the obligation to follow the 7 laws, but the connection with God was lost to the world at the time of the giving of Sinai because the world rejected God. They had the choice. The world rejected God. Now, there's still the negative commands that exist in the Torah. The reward that might be given for doing something positive or becoming a better person, there is a certain sort of spiritual reward that works on the person, even if they're an idolater. But the long-term connection to God doesn't. Giving charity for a person that denies the existence of God and is involved in idol worship. If the person gives charity, that doesn't build the connection to God, because the person doesn't have a connection to God. In order to have the connection to God, they first have to understand the sovereignty of God, to understand the sovereignty of Torah. Then there is that benefit of the connection to God that comes through giving charity or any of the other positive things that a person does. Accepting the sovereignty of God is therefore a critical element that it kind of goes beyond the simple command of the prohibition against idolatry. So this is critical in this point, that a person needs to accept the sovereignty of God and thereby the sovereignty of Torah in order to have that connection. That's how it can be said. A person who serves idols denies all of God's commandments because he does not accept God's sovereignty. It doesn't mean the person is, disobeying the commandments. He just doesn't have a connection to the commandments, or he doesn't have a connection that creates a connection to God through the commandments. as well as his honor, as God's honor, and God's true existence. As explained in Part 1, Chapter 1, Topic 7, anyone who worships an idol is declaring that God is not the only true existence, since it is by virtue of God's existence that all creations exist, as explained in Topic 1, Part 1, Chapter 1, Topics 3 and 4, that the idolater removes himself from the true faith. So there's the aspect of idolatry, the prohibition against idolatry. That in the Gemara, it explains that the three possibilities of understanding the person that connects himself to this. One aspect is that it's a person that denies idolatry, that takes on the prohibition against idolatry. Another one is that he takes on the 7 commandments. And then there's a third one that he takes on all the laws except for except for one prohibition. So the question that can be asked is, well, why is idolatry by itself considered sufficient? Well, the idea is that idolatry, if the person accepts the sovereignty of God, that's the part that it says accepting the prohibition against idolatry. What that means is he's accepting the sovereignty of God, which will lead to following the rest of the laws. Once that connection is established, then following the rest of the laws continues from that. Thank you.